Hello, welcome everybody. It's good to be back at FoxFest. Virtual this time, but that doesn't really matter because we have a chance to see each other. My session is today about migrating FoxPro code to .NET. I'm sure some of you will have looked at it, but this session I hope to show you that it's possible and that with very little changes you can use FoxPro code, move it to .NET and get it to run. Okay, my name is Robert van der Hulst. I'm not going to read this slide, but I've been in IT for many, many years. My son calls me a software dinosaur, and I think that's the right description. I'm here. One of the reasons why I'm here is because I'm one of the founders of the X# project. And this is an open source implementation of Xbase, and we consider FoxPro to be one of the Xbase languages for .NET. You can see my contact details here. What I'd like to say in advance, even though we are the X# project, I'm one of them, this is not a vendor session. We are not selling X#. X# is free. You can download it for free. And we think it's a good opportunity for all of you to move your .NET, your FoxPro code to .NET. Okay, let's switch off the camera. Good. Okay, what I will talk about is I will compare first FoxPro and .NET and the strengths and the weaknesses, and tell you about how X# fits in, and then we're going to do a lot of code. So we have a very few slides, a lot of code. Okay, this is my interpretation of FoxPro. I must admit I'm not a very proficient FoxPro developer. I've used FoxPro to evaluate and work on other people's code, but I think FoxPro is strong because of its powerful IDE, editors, etc., and you can quickly develop an application. FoxPro has a very fast database, and that makes it very powerful. As a non-daily FoxPro developer, I also know some of its weaknesses, and what I think is one of the biggest one is that it supports undeclared, untyped code, and that may leave potential problems in your code. You may be overwriting someone else's variables because you didn't declare variables. What I also think is an important weakness is that if you work in a team, since FoxPro stores a lot of stuff in binary format, it's complicated to do source code control and team development. It's not impossible. Some people have found workarounds by exporting projects and forms, etc., to text files, but it's complicated. What I also see as a weakness is that the code is not really compiled, it's interpreted. It has something to do with the speed. It makes it a bit slower, and it's also easier to basically decode what it's doing. And the final 2 points speak for themselves. Since FoxPro is fairly small, it has a small market, there are not that many third-party tools. I think most people are available today are from the third party, the people organizing this and sponsoring this. But if you compare that to .NET, it's really small. And the last one, we all know FoxPro is not being developed anymore, so it is slowly passing away. So I think most of you are looking for a new future. Now, .NET is, I would say, the most obvious alternative, and some of the things that makes .NET unique, in my opinion, is that it's language agnostic. You can mix development languages in one project. So you can have one component written in C#, the other in VB, and the other in an Xbase variation of .NET called X#. What I also think is very powerful is that it's declared and typed. So everything has to be pre-declared. That means that your code has less chance of unexpected behavior. Also, team development and source code control will work perfectly because all code, even the forms and the reports, are in text files. So things can be checked in, can be compared. It's easy to see what your colleague changed, and if you have conflicting changes, you can merge the changes and fix it. And finally, I think since .NET is widely embraced, there's a huge third-party market. The problem with that is that it's sometimes difficult to choose. Are you going to use UI controls from DevExpress, for example, of Infogistix, of Telerik? That's sometimes the bigger problem then. And also some of these controls have thousands of options. So you have to learn new controls and new options. Weakness, I think there are different IDEs, and none of them look like, if you come from FoxPro, like the FoxPro IDE. You can use Visual Studio. Some people use Visual Studio Code, which is like a text editor only, but there are also other IDEs. And what I also think is a weakness, or maybe it's not a weakness, but the .NET runtime is huge. It will take a lot of time before you feel comfortable there. And the final weakness, FoxPro, starting up a form or starting up a program goes really, really fast. If your application is large, you will see that in .NET, it may take a bit longer to start your program because the edit, compile, run cycle can take a bit longer. Now, I know Microsoft and also the other vendors have done a lot to improve that, and they have stuff like edit and continue, but still it's a bit slower and a bit more difficult than in the FoxPro environment. So where does X# fit in? Well, X#, let's go back a few years in time. It was introduced in 2015, and we wanted to do an X-based language for .NET. We could do that because it's a lot of work to write a compiler, because Microsoft released the source code for the C# compiler on GitHub. So this project called Roslyn, open source, was our starting point, and we built our compiler on top of Roslyn. So I would say more than 90% of the source code in the X# compiler is identical to what you get in the C# compiler. So that also means that we didn't have to reinvent the wheel, and we could fairly quickly deliver an implementation of X based on .NET. Now, it consists of a number of components: a compiler, a runtime, and with runtime I mean the support for functions like left and right and subster. We have DBF support. We can read all kinds of DBF formats, including, of course, the FoxPro format with DBF, but also DBC support. It's all supported there. The indexes are there, etc. It comes with a set of tools to convert, for example, FoxPro projects or Visual Object projects. And it integrates inside Visual Studio. It means that you get your Visual Studio project support, editor support, and you can design a Windows form with X# code behind. So it is basically a full first-class citizen. So I think X# combines the strength of X-Base, because personally I like the X-Base language a lot, with .NET. Now what we have done in the project is we designed a couple of dialects, because all these X-Base languages originated with DBase, but over the years these have grown a bit apart, and we have different syntaxes for things. So by using the concept of dialects, you can enable or disable specific language features that exist in one dialect but not in another. For example, the FoxPro syntax to define a class may be a bit different from the Visual Object syntax or the X-Base++ syntax. And by using the concept of a dialect, you can enable one class syntax over the other. Finally, the core is not really a dialect, but this was our implementation of a language that has X-Base syntax but behaves like C#. So some things that are specific to X-Base, like for example DBF support or memory variables like privates and publics, does not exist in core. Also, core does not support untyped variables. Everything must be typed in core. So that's how you can see the core language. A lot of X# was written in the core language, but of course we allow you to write code in the FoxPro language, the FoxPro dialect. Okay, I'm almost going to the code. First, a little bit about code organization. If you run in FoxPro, you have FoxPro projects, and inside the project you have forms and reports and source files and class libraries. The term FoxPro project is a bit different from the project term in Visual Studio. You can see a FoxPro project as a Visual Studio solution. So terminology may be different and it may be confusing. And there are also some other differences. People coming from X-based languages are used to work with functions and procedures, and that is something that does not exist in the .NET world. In .NET, everything is object-oriented. So we'll see now, we go to the source code editor and we'll see functions and procedures and commands, and we'll have a look at how it works and what Visual Studio, how we edit it, and what the compiler does with that code. So let's switch. Okay. I'm going to my Visual Studio sample. Some of this code is already in the downloads area, but I've added some samples and I've changed some samples. So I'll upload my samples and my documentation after the session, so you will get the latest version. Okay, let's start with this sample that it does something silly. It just adds two numbers and shows the number on the output screen. So this is called test variables. Over here we see, by the way, this is Visual Studio. We see the solution here, and this is what's called a project. And this particular project, as you can see with the X in front of it, is an X# project. And the Sharp project consists of a number of source files. Okay, let's try to compile this, and I'm going to set a breakpoint so we can follow the code. So the first time I compile it, it takes a bit, and then we get a complaint. Okay, so what is wrong here? Now this is Visual Studio, and if there's a problem, we get to see it in the error list. And over here, we see an error saying variable A has not been declared, assuming this is a field or a mem file. So what's happening here? This is the kind of code that we have seen a lot in FoxPro. Somewhere in a procedure, like a click event on a form, you introduce a new variable called A, and you give it a value and you do something with it. This is not a declared variable. So the compiler doesn't know what it is. In this case, it says it could be a field in the current cursor or a mem file, a memory variable. But in this case, I do not want it to be a memory variable or a field. So I want this to be a local variable. Now, we can solve that by typing local in front of it, and then it compiles. So now the compiler knows this is a local variable. I could also have done private. Compiler also thinks this is okay. The concept of the private is something completely different from a local, as you may know. I prefer a local because it limits the visibility, and it is the compiler knows that this variable doesn't have to be visible outside of the scope of this function. Okay, we'll compile it again. You see, with a small project, compilation is not bad. I'm typing Shift F6. That's the shortcut on my machine. I could have also done build Fox examples, but I think the shortcut is easier. And let's run this. I'm running it in the debugger, and I'm going to press F8 to step in. F11, sorry. And now we're over here. And this is the typical Visual Studio debugging window. On the left-hand side, we see the local variables. And on the right-hand side, we see the call stack. And this has been adjusted by us, by the X# team. So you see things as an X# developer. You can also see that the language over here is X# and not C#. Later in the session, I will show you some C# code, and you will see the mix of languages on the call stack. On the bottom left, you see the local variables, and the A is uninitialized, and that's why it's called nil here. And after assigning, we see a local variable, 42 long, and when I let it run, we'll see the screen, and as we all know, 20 plus 22 is 42, and the any key to continue is there. So what do I want to show here is that the X# compiler prefers declared variables. Now, if your code is full of undeclared variables, that may be a problem because it won't compile. Now, what you can do in Visual Studio, you can do it in several ways. You can click here on the thing and click on properties, or you can go to project properties. You see here the properties which are basically translated into options for the compiler. And what you can do here, you can set all kinds of properties, but I'm interested now in compiler errors and warnings, I can tell it, do not treat warnings as errors. It means that the compiler will not mark this as an error, but as a warning. The code will run, as you see, but we still see warnings on this screen. So this variable has not been declared. He assumes that this is a field or a mem file, but he knows how to handle fields or, in this case, private and memory variables. So yes, we prefer declared code, we prefer typed code, but in this case, it's not necessary. In the debugger, you will not see A anymore, because if we go to this line, A is not a local variable anymore, but it's a private variable, and it's handled in a bit of a different way. So our recommendation would be declare variables as local, and now my screen is black. Okay. I'm not sure what happens. Is this open? Having a problem? No, come on. Doug, I lost my screen.
I can still see it.
Yeah, but my screen is flashing black and white. That must be something local then. I'm sorry.
I see Visual Studio open right now.
Yeah. Ah, terrible. This must be my local setup. I'll switch to a single screen environment. That will make things easier. Switch this off.
I can see it again, so I can see Visual Studio.
Yeah, but everything is flashing here. I'm sorry about that. Sorry, people. This never happens, but it does happen today. Give me a minute to fix this. This is a hardware problem. Okay. I think I have detached one screen, and now come on. Oh, I hate this. Is it Visual Studio logo? I think Visual Studio logs up. Firefox. Are you guys still seeing my screen, or?
No, your screen is not on right now.
Let me see if I can get it on again.
Okay, now we've got
Yeah, and I'll start
Visual
my,
Studio again.
yeah, and I'll start my PowerPoint again. Things are crashing today. Okay.
There's your slide.
And where's my AOS Visual Studio? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Sorry about that, guys. So where was I? Okay.
Well,
if
you have a moment, we do have a few questions.
Okay, let's do that. Sorry for the interruption. Technical problems.
Does X# still have a 2 GB limitation on DBFs?
At the moment, it's compatible, so the answer is yes.
Okay. Going back to the variables, what about using m.xxx to define it automatically as a variable?
Yeah, that's supported.
Okay. Are private variables scoped the same way in X# as they are in VFP?
If you declare a private variable in X#, it hides private variables with the same name that we declared a level up in the code stack, basically. So if that's what you mean, then the answer is yes.
Okay, that's it for questions.
Okay, to answer the question about the private variable, maybe it's interesting to show how we've implemented it. I'm clicking an option here now that brings up the application in a tool called ILSpy that allows you to look into Visual Studio in memories. And what you see here is that this function gets translated into a method of a class called compiler text exe.function. So like what I said at the beginning, .NET doesn't know functions. So what we do is the compiler generates a class called functions with a method start, this is our entry point, and a method test variables. And inside this method, we call a runtime function that says basically, I'm declaring a new level, call stack level basically for privates. And inside this function, I'm adding a. So this creates a new variable a, and I'm getting the variable a. And then at the end, it says release all variables that were introduced at this level. So by doing that, we basically hide variables a that were declared one level above. So that's how we implement it. And if you run the same code with locals, give you an idea. It's probably a bit technical, but I think it's interesting. You will see that now it declares a local variable a with the value 42, and it doesn't do a var put and a var get, which are our runtime functions to get privates and to set privates. What you do see here is that what I wanted to mention this too, that this is typed as usual. In my introduction, I said in FoxPro everything is untyped, and .NET doesn't know untyped. So we have created a special type. We called it usual because it's a name that we inherited from the Visual Objects community. And this type is like a container type. It can contain values and it has a type flag. And the usual type knows how to add two numbers or two strings, but it also knows that you cannot add a string to a number or a number to a string. But for example, adding a number to a date is supported. So you can add the next day or the previous day. So this usual type is what we use to implement untyped variables. Now, and of course, in this case, I know that it's a long, so you can also type it as long, just like you do with FoxPro. And then you will see that it becomes an int. int a equals int is the .NET name for the long variable. So by doing this, then of course you cannot add a string to it anymore, because then the compiler will complain. So if I would try to do a equals some text, now we get a compilation error says I cannot implicitly convert type string to int. So that's how we implement that. And by doing that and by declaring variables as a type, you will get compiler errors that help you find your problems. Without the as long, this would be accepted, because the a will first be a number and then will be a string. So the usual type accepts both. But if you want to make sure your code is fast and has less errors, we recommend typing. Okay, let's continue. I already showed a bit about functions. As you can see, we have a preprocessor like FoxPro, so we can enable or disable code with a #if, or we also have ifdef. This is a bit different, but it can do the same. Okay. What do we have here? Oh, I left the code in there. And compile it. My window comes to the wrong screen now. Over here, we see, again, we can see the call stack. We see again, L string here is not typed. We call do something. Do something doesn't have a return type, so it can return anything, and it returns a string in this case. And now we see that L string becomes a string. And then the call stack window, you could easily see, could follow the flow of the program. And that was the reason that I had this sample in here. What you can now see is that the function class gets extra static method for each of the functions that we declared in our code. The concept of a static method does not exist in FoxPro, but it's something that most object-oriented languages have, and it means a method that does not need an object of the class. So there is no object of type functions. You can call the methods inside the class, and it's a bit like a namespace or a library that you said you can find the function over there. The compiler takes care of automatically finding do something in the same type where the test function call is stored. Okay. An important difference for all the X-based languages compared with the languages such as C# is that we have commands. So this is an example, and it's really stupid, but it opens the file, doesn't go top, scans, etc. These are all keywords, as you can see, because they are blue in the editor. .NET doesn't know that many keywords, and C# or VB doesn't know that many keywords. So how do we do this? And the answer to that is we have a preprocessor. So the preprocessor converts this into something else. Now, and if you want to see what the preprocessor does, you can go to the build page again, and there's an option called generate preprocessor output. And let me open this file here. And what you can see now is the result of what our preprocessor has done. And if we go to this function, let's drag it and put it next to it so we have an idea. The use command has actually been translated in a function call dbUse area. Go top has been translated into db go top, etc. So even though .NET doesn't support commands, we have used the preprocessor to declare commands and translate them into function calls, which in the end will be method calls, because dbContinue is a method in a class that is part of the X# runtime. So one of the big differences is that between X-based languages and .NET is that we have commands, and we have in X#, we have implemented commands with the preprocessor. And if you're interested to know how this works, you can have a look at, I'm going to hide this one. You have a look at what we call the includes node now in your project, and you can see all the include files that were included by the compiler. And the use command is, I think in the FoxPro command file, there is the use. As you can see, this is not the right one. Then probably this one is used. There's a use command over here. This is used, exclusive, shared, etc. All kind of options. It translates into dbuse area. So we use the preprocessor to map normal commands to something that .NET understands. Now, it will not surprise you that this code actually works. If I enable it, I didn't enable it. As you can see, we're listing now 3 people that live in the state of California. So one difference between the X-based languages in general and .NET is that we have commands, and the preprocessor makes it possible to use these commands. Okay, the next that I want to show is class syntax. Let's see, where are my classes? Over here. Since we are compiling in the FoxPro dialect, which you can see here on the first page of the application properties, it's FoxPro dialect. You also see the other dialects that we support. We support the FoxPro define class syntax. This looks fairly normal, I would say, to most of you. So you declare a class, it as custom, because in FoxPro everything inherits from custom class. We created a custom class in the FoxPro part of the X# runtime. We declare 2, I think you guys would call this properties. We initialize them with an empty string, and we have a function that returns this first name plus this last name. You can see that this keyword is supported, that the dot as separator between the object and the property is supported, etc. Over here, you see another class declaration. This is test core. This syntax with class and class is what we call the core syntax. And it's a bit different because it specifies public to specify the visibility of a problem. So we say this one is public. We could also have done, for example, protected or private, which means that the visibility becomes less and less. But I want to keep it public for the example. And we can see that we also support an S clause to declare the type of the property. Actually, in this case, this is not a property, but in the X# syntax, this is a field. I don't think FoxPro distinguishes between fields and properties. We do, because that's something .NET has. Now let's run this code and see how it works. So we create, is this enabled already? Yeah. No, what do we get? Okay, yeah, I've not, where is my iFull name? I've commented out code to make it easier, but of course this introduces a problem. This is not something I wanted to show, but now it works. Okay, let's run this. Okay, we are going to instantiate the class. This is the FoxPro way of creating a class. In FoxPro, this can also create an ActiveX object. In our implementation.NET, that's the same. And we give it the name. But what's important to realize is that this is a string. So the compiler has no way of knowing that create object does indeed return a test VFP. It does, but the name here and the name there could be different. We see an object OTest. It has no properties yet, and we no field. And now we see the properties. And since, just like in FoxPro, we inherited from custom, we also get properties like top and left, height and width, etc. I'm not sure why in FoxPro you cannot create a class from nothing, but that's the way FoxPro works. And as you can see now, I'm going to call message box. Hopefully it's on this screen. No, it shows it unfortunately on my other screen. That's what you get after you reset your machine. Anyway, it shows test VFP Robert Vanderhulst. Again, but now we have core, or I should have put another breakpoint. Let's go here. Anyway, this syntax is how you implement or how you create a class compared to what in C# would be new test car open close paren. This is with the curly braces is how X# says to the compiler, I want to instantiate an object. And the rest is the same. By the way, you see colons over here. This is how we in Visual Objects we used to do it, but the dot works as well. You see a colon equals. That's the way how we were used to do it, but it works with a single equals as well. I personally prefer the colon equals because there's no ambiguity here. It doesn't mean if it's equal to something. It is always an assignment, but we do support both. But of course, if you read this code, let's do it the FoxPro way. Now the question, of course, what does this mean? Is this now comparing the first name to Robert, or is this assigning Robert to the first name? That's why if we do it in the where I come from the Visual Objects world, we would make a clear distinction by using the assignment operator for assigns and the equals operator for comparisons. But we do support both. Okay, and this one, yeah, okay, yeah, that's test 3. This is this one. I wanted to show you that we also have a syntax difference for fields because these are compiled as fields, and this is what's called a property, as the name indicates. And this is a property that's a getter that only returns values, but you cannot set it, and it returns this first name plus this last name. You could do the same in this class by typing, just like in FoxPro, full name access. That compiles too, but it will give me an error now because it says the non-invocable member full name, and it is now an access or basically a getter and no longer a method. So in that case, if we change that, we must change this to full name too. Is it clear so far? These are the most important syntax difference between FoxPro and .NET that we try to make sure that are supported both ways. So we supported the .NET way and we supported the FoxPro way.
There are a few questions, not necessarily related to that, but with DBFs, does it support seeks using indexes to optimize calc for, locate for, etc.?
We do not have Rushmore built in yet.
Okay. Is there a create cursor command and a SQL exec function?
Yes, the SQL exec will come later as an example. Create cursor, this is now my limited knowledge of FoxPro, but I think it creates basically a work area from a structure, a virtual DBF.
Yes.
It's not implemented yet, but it's high on our to-do list because it's relatively easy to implement. It's just a question of time.
Okay. What about with and with the end with and end with function? Or,
supported.
Okay. Somebody mentioned that the syntax was end space scan. Does it support end scan as one word?
Let me show you. Does this make sense?
Yep.
So our preprocessor translate end func to end function, and proc to end procedure, and scan to end space scan. It's both supported.
Okay, great. That's it for questions.
Good. Okay. There's one thing from this part, I have to check the time, that I want to show, and that is you guys, when you guys in FoxPro speak about events, it's usually related to the UI and to button events, etc. What that is that you declare code that gets triggered by an event. Now, in .NET, that exists, of course. It's usually called event handlers and not events, because in .NET, events is that you tell an object that someone else can register an event to follow what's happening. And I have a sample of that I'd like to show you, because that's something that quite often happens. So in this case, I have a class which I call sender, and it's going to send messages. And I have a class that's a receiver that will register itself as a sender to the sender, as please give me a message when something happens, I want to be notified. So we have, in the case of events, you always have someone who triggers the event. In this case, that's the sender class. And we have someone who wants to receive events. Now, what you do in .NET is, in a class that wants to send event, you declare an event, and this is now using the core syntax with the keyword event message as message event. What you tell the .NET is that anyone who wants to receive messages needs to implement this particular signature, a method or a function with this signature. So it needs to have a sender parameter, an incoming sender parameter, and an incoming string parameter. And the return value is irrelevant. That's what void means, nothing basically. So this class allows others to register for messages as long as they implement this particular signature. And as you can see, the receiver class has a method with exactly that signature, oSender as object and CMessage as string. Now, in my sample code, what I'm doing is I'm creating a sender object and two receiver objects. These are independent. In the receiver 1, I set the name to receiver 1, and guess what? In receiver 2, I set it to 2. Then I'm using this plus equals operator, and it's the same operator that you will see in C# code, to tell the .NET runtime that I want to register the method message event inside oReceiver1 as an event handler for messages. And I'm doing the same for receiver 2, which means that these two objects will both of them have a method that will be called. So if I send one message, it will be received twice. Now I'm going to send two messages, so you will see that both receiver 1 and receiver 2 both will receive message 1 and message 2. So where in FoxPro you can register event handlers, in .NET you can also create your own event senders. And I think that's a really valuable addition. Now let's see if this runs, and hopefully I didn't break my code too much and it compiles. Yes, it does. Let's go to over here. As you can see, I've typed all my locals, because in this case, if you want to do these kind of things, you want to have locals that are typed. And I'm going to go here, run to here. We see nothing yet. Now I'm registering the event handlers. You will also not see anything yet. But if I now send, then inside my sender class it says if self message not equal null. That means if anyone registered for the message event, then I'm calling self message. So which means I'm calling all registered event handlers and passing it this object and the message. And I see, if I step in, I see this happens twice. And if I do it again, this happens twice. So on my output screen, I receive receiver 1 got message 1, receiver 2 got message 1, and then receiver 1 got message 2, and receiver 2 got message 2. Now, this may not look very spectacular, but I think it's a very strong thing, because you can actually hook up objects in your application and trigger events, and you do not have to register events. So what you will see is that there are many events in .NET that you're not following, but you may want to follow certain events, and also you may define many events, and if someone is interested, they can receive the event. I think this is very powerful, and it makes applications really useful. In the X# runtime, for example, we give you the opportunity to register for area events, and then you will get cursor events, basically, if you talk in FoxPro terms, and you will be received when the record pointer gets moved, or when something was written, and you can respond to that. Is this clear so far?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
In Visual FoxPro, commands and functions can be shortened to the first 4 letters. Is that supported in X#?
Like I would say, old commands, yes. Old keywords, yes, like while can be abbreviated to WHIL. In the FoxPro dialect, in the core dialect, you have to do the full keyword.
Okay.
But here you could, for example, do Fina, and it will still be blue. Actually not. Oh, okay. Well, this is probably not an old keyword then, but some keywords, some older, func, for example, definitely. But function names, not. Function names must be full. There are 2 or 3 that we have an abbreviation for, but most have to be fully qualified.
Okay. Is self the same as this, the self keyword? Okay.
Yes. Self comes from was introduced with Clipper. So that's I sometimes compare the X-based community with the Christian church. And let's say that we have the Catholic branch and the Protestant branch, which has split up in 27,000 different Protestant churches. And in one of those original branches, the Clipper branch, self was introduced, and most of the dialects or most of the derived languages support self. FoxPro has this, and we support this now too. So our compiler translates this to the equivalent of self. Or actually, since we compile into Roslyn, we translate self into this, because Roslyn wants to have this.
Okay. For event handling, is the FoxPro bind event syntax supported?
Not yet. It's on my list, but I'm not sure how many people use that. So
okay,
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, that's it for questions.
What I have here is one more thing here, and then I'm going to go to some other things. If you come from the X-based world, you have, I would say, you think like a normal person. So if you divide 10 by 42, you think, oh, that must return a fraction. Now this will generate warnings, because I and J have not been declared. As you can see on the errors list, it's better. So what you could do is say, okay, I make it local, then the compiler is happy. And indeed, well, it complains about something else, but that's not relevant for now. And if I run this on my other screen, you will see the result is 0.24. This is normal. However, for C++ and C# people, this is not normal, because they think they have to declare things as a type. So we could say we declare them as int, for example, which is, by the way, the same as long. And then if you run it, the result is 0. And this is an important thing that you should realize, that these, I would say, developers that are more to the native language and not business people, like most of us are, think, yeah, if you divide an integer by an integer, the result should be an integer. And you have to use the modulo operator to get what's left. And in this case, what's left is 10. Because if you divide 10 by 42, well, it's 0 with a remainder of 10. Now, if you are working in the language like FoxPro or in the visual objects, this is not natural. Now, there are two ways to solve this. By the way, we also support the var keyword. var is just like in C# says, compiler, take the right hand side, or take what's ever here, right of the I, and evaluate its type and derive the type of I from the number. And in this case, it will derive two integers, and the result will be 0, as you can see here. So this is not good. Now, if you want to have X-base compatible divisions, we have a compiler option, and I think in our exporter this is enabled by default. Let's go to the right page. We call it, because yeah, we are from the Clipper Church, if you remember what I said, we call this Clipper compatible integer divisions. If you hover over this, you will see it says /VO12. We are derived from the Vulkan language a bit, and it was called VO12 there. So if you do that, then even though the variables, come on, I'm not sure why it keeps on moving to this screen. Even though the variables are integers, it will return what you would expect, comma 24. So integer divisions normally in .NET return integers, but we have a way to control that. And for those of you who are interested in the deeper things, I just switched the project property on over here. And if you see here, it says VO12, which of course you can also find in our documentation. But you can also do it in a different way. Come on. FoxPro, sorry, X# has an option to put these kind of compiler instructions into your source code. And we call that pragma statements. And this options VO12 on says to the compiler, from now on in this source file, enable this option, and this means Clipper integer divisions. This is something to be aware of, because if you're not aware of the fact that integer divisions return integers, then you will see that code doesn't do that, especially if you divide, for example, dimensions on screens, it will look terrible. And that's because you do not get the rounded value, or like with 2 decimals or whatever, but it just throws away things. Okay, let me look where I am. Like that. Yeah, what's also important to realize is that our languages, the X-based languages, are not case sensitive. So I can type test division and it will still run. That's not something that's valid for C# and the other languages. They are all case sensitive. So if you start mixing things, it's a good idea to make sure that you keep a consistent casing in your code. Good. Okay. Now, if you move code over from FoxPro to .NET, you will probably want to use it. You're moving it over so you can use it. Now, of course, you can move your whole app over. I'm going to show that also before the end of the session. But it also may be possible that you want to use it in a C# app or something else. And what I have here is a class library with a few example classes. I have a customer class here written in the FoxPro define class syntax with a procedure full name access, so this becomes a property, and a static function which is going to return a list of names as a string. And I have a static function that gives me a simple customer object, and I have something that gets data from SQL, hopefully. In my test app, I have a C# form, and is going to get, this one creates a simple object. This one is going to retrieve the names. And let's start with a simple customer first. The third button is going to retrieve a customer object. So what I want to show you here now is that you can mix these kind of code. And I'm not sure if I started this with debugging on, so let's restart it. So if I press the first button, I'm going to appear. And now I see I have an option on that I do not want on, so I make the call stack a bit cleaner. We can see that there's a main, something external, which started up the form, and the form, the button click gets called. And inside the button click, I'm creating an object. And if I go into customer full name, we get Robin Hood. Now, you didn't see it step into full name, and that's a feature of the Visual Studio Debugger. You can tell it to step over properties. Sometimes that's useful because you do not want to enter all the properties. But if you go here now, and now I go in there, you can actually see that it goes into the code that implements this property. So the procedure full name access has become a property. That's why it was skipped before, and it works. So this is okay. Now let's go to this one, button 2. And in this one, I will again skip into my FoxPro dialect class. So this is the FoxPro dialect class. I'm going to use a .NET object called string builder, which is recommended if you want to create a large string. I'm mixing all kinds of languages, as you can see. The field first name, last name here, and state is something that we use to indicate to the compiler that we're using something in our code that is coming from a DBF, from a cursor. So it will not be ambiguous. I'm going to open the file, I'm going to scan. And as you can see on the bottom, it has returned 3 names here. And it shows me 3 names. So again, what I want to show you here is that you can mix both .NET style and FoxPro style, and you can mix C# and X#. The final one is, I should probably want to show you the guys for time considerations, something that get data from a SQL Server. Okay, no, my code is wrong. Where is it? I have too many options in my sample. Sorry, guys. Bring it in. Okay. Now I'm in my code, and this is the normal SQL string connect that you guys have in FoxPro 2. It takes a bit. This actually sets up an ODBC connection, and as you can see, I'm specifying the ODBC driver, the serval, but it works. I'm going to SQL exec, and it gets, okay, argument error. Why is that? Oops, I don't know. Is this new? This used to work, so I must have broken something. Oh. Come on. Hopefully this works now. Yes, it does. Anyway, okay. So we see Nancy DiVolio. So this uses the same SQL exact SQL String Connect. What I wanted to show you is that we have added, since ODBC is a bit technology a bit from the age where FoxPro was started. So I don't want to say negative things about FoxPro, but it's a bit old. We give you the opportunity to use the newer technology to connect, in this case, to a SQL Server database using the SQL Server ADO.NET provider. And that's what I'm doing over here. I'm telling the X# runtime, please use the SQL Server factory. We work with a factory model, and it should, come on, where's my app? It should return immediately. You saw no delay, so it gets back immediately. So we do allow you to connect to databases, both using ODBC, but also through the ADO.NET provider. And I think that is the preferred way of doing things. Okay, 10 minutes. Okay, what I wanted to show you, a last way of using FoxPro code is I have a Blazor app. I'm not going to run the Blazor wizard. I'm going to run the app, and then we see what we've changed there. This takes a bit because it has to start up a web UI. Hopefully it works. Do we see a browser? Okay. This is the Blazor app. The normal Blazor app comes with these 3 pages, and fetch data gets some weather forecast with some random numbers. This is a counter, and this is the home page. Now what I've added is 2 options here, and let's have a look at these options in Visual Studio. So I'm going to the Solution Explorer, and I have a Fox. I called it Fox, so it's easier to find. Fox Customer Eraser. This is the page. Well, these are a bit of HTML kind of things. And on the button it says call get customer. And get customer will, let's put a breakpoint here. Or did I run it? Oh, I ran it. Maybe I ran it in the debugger. Let's see. Yeah, I did run it in the debugger. So it calls into FoxPro style code and returns John Doe. And if we go to Fox employees, you see that it calls this method. Let's have a look. So I declare a table with a for each loop, and I tell it that I'm going to get an employees collection, and I'm going to get the information from the employees. And this information, get employees, is in my class library in this thing. And as you can see, it sets the SQL backend to the SQL Server. It connects, does a select, and basically gets an employee object. And what I'm doing here, I'm using a .NET collection, a typed collection of employee objects, and I'm returning an employee object to array. And inside my Razor page, it stores the array into an iList, and that's what you see. I think that's pretty cool. By the way, this is the debug window that's running behind, so we can see the web server running. So, and because it was so fast, I've deliberately put a slowdown in there so we can see, because normally if you fetch data from a server, it may take a while. So I see this loading thing here, and then you see the data coming from the database. Okay, so this is showing you FoxPro syntax combined with .NET, of course. So in this particular case, you see that this is FoxPro with a scan-in. I could have done a for state or whatever, but I also have a list of employee objects. It's a mixture. And I think it's very powerful that we can mix both X-based style code and .NET code. What you see over here is the syntax that is coming from the VO world and also valid for Xbase++, to indicate that something is a field, so it is a little bit less ambiguous for the compiler, and the compiler knows, okay, in this case I need to query for the field in the current area and get it and retrieve the value of that field. Okay. Yeah, finally, I know that you all want to see, can we also convert our apps? So I did prepare something, but I don't have much time, so come back to the booth later if you're interested. But we created a tool. It's still in beta, so it's not perfect yet. But I can open a project. Now I have a project in the VFF samples folder. Examples. This is something that we got from a French user from the. It's open in FoxPro, of course. Well, in FoxPro we can see that it is a form that has a custom control on there, and there is a class library that has the custom control. As you can see, and these are buttons with images. It's not spectacular, and on the button there is a skip event or delete or append, etc. So, but I'm going to close this because otherwise I cannot import it. And in this tool, I can specify my output folder, and let's do C temp. I should have preset that, but it's going to export. And in my temp folder, you now see that it has actually created a solution and a project for the project itself and a project for the class libraries. Now, for time's sake, I'm not going to iterate the compilation. This doesn't compile completely, but I've already have a fixed version of that. So we're going to open that one. Yeah, it's probably a good idea to stop debugging. Open project solution, and I'm going to my VFF folder. This is something that my colleague has already cleaned up a bit, but what you can see is that it created a class library project that has the toolbar in there. This was just the code in here is generated from what was in the binary. So, and we do some translations. So in FoxPro, I think there's a top and a left, and there is a width and a height. We combine those into a drawing point and a drawing size. There's an event handler. We have hooked up the event handler. Inside this file, you will find the original code of the event handlers. And there is some comments from the VFP exporter. They will probably remove that later. But I know the original code didn't have the parents, and we need the parents for a method or function call. But this is normal FoxPro code, I would say, with the select and BOF, etc. As you can see, this is coming from a French user, so suivre means I have no idea. Next or previous, one of the two. Debut is stop, think, and fin is end. So you see all these event handlers are there, and the form itself doesn't open. That's great. It's always when a demo anyway. If you run it, it does run. I hope. Okay, no. Oh, sorry. I have a problem now. It doesn't run because of a path issue, but believe me, it runs. There is some work to do, but we are able to transform code. What we do is we put a little startup code in there. This is code that we put in there that basically calls the original starting point, and the forms are imported. This one works, but the customer's form doesn't. Yeah, I think I'm almost out of my time, so that's why I want to finish it off. I can show you this running later if you come to our booth. Are there any questions?
Let me see. Is the Blazor example running in WebAssembly or on the server?
This is server.
Okay. This is a little bit older question. Is the code a working VFP app or an SCX that was run from X#, or was it converted first? I think it was before you started showing your conversion.
Yeah, well, our converter exports everything to XML files and then has a set of templates that it processes XML files and generates code. And for example, for a form, we generate a form and a form designer PRG and put the size and etc. colors in the designer PRG. And we put the code behind, basically the button events, etc., in the form PRG.
Okay, I think that's it for questions.
Okay, to finish off, we also have events like this, and we have an event in March next year in Austin, Texas. More information on our website. We hope to meet some FoxPro people there, so because we need to see your code to understand your code and hopefully make it possible to compile your code. Thanks for the session. Please fill in your evaluation. Let me switch my camera on. Hopefully that works. Okay, I have a final slide. Like I said in the beginning, I hoped I show you a technical session. This is not a vendor session. You can download our product for free. But of course, we also have children that need to be fed and want to go to university. So we have if it was completely for free, we wouldn't be able to do it. We have a support program, subscribers funded development. You can subscribe, and if you use the coupon code for VFF 2022, you get a 50% discount on the first year. And we set the priorities for development based on the preferences of subscribers. So if no one from the FoxPro community subscribes, we will add less FoxPro features than we will get subscribed. And we do have a couple of subscribers already, but we would like to welcome more. That's it for now. Thank you. Come to our booth if you want to hear more. And I want to apologize again for the technical problems that I had. This normally doesn't happen, but it was a bad day. Sorry about that. Any final questions?
No, that's it.
Thanks a lot, and I hope to see you in our booth.